I think one of the issues that we have just society in general is that we no longer have widespread, institutionally sanctioned modes to achieve self-transcendent experiences, right? Most tribal societies, most of the early empires, going back to the Greeks, etc., there were rites that every person, whether they were a slave or a king, did early in life, and it was a way of teaching you what it was to be human. And these were these sort of difficult, often experiences. And the problem, I think, that it gives us a lot of our crisis of meaning and a lot of the alienation that exists in modern society is we don't have something like that.
All right, we are thrilled to have not one but two amazing guests, a dynamic duo, Nicco and Leo from the Institute of Advanced Consciousness Studies. What is up, guys?
Hey, how's it going there?
Good morning.
It's going well. Amazing. And, I love talking about consciousness. So life is amazing right now. And I think as a great starting point, you guys have a very intriguing, for those of us interested in consciousness, entity name. Tell everyone about what the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies is.
Sure. Yeah, it's a unique place for sure. So we are a nonprofit research outlet, right? We're technically a 501c3, and we pride ourselves on kind of setting up shop at the interface between academic rigor and startup culture, right? So we get the ability to do solid, rigorous academic grade science, but also afford ourselves with the flexibility and intellectual freedom that would be afforded as something like a startup, and really, allowing for us to maintain a focus on the applicability of ecologically valid tools, right? Instead of only contributing to the scientific corpus, which is immensely important, keeping an eye on the ability to kind of immediately translate these tools and insights into things that can make meaningful impacts in people's lives. Our research outfit kind of has that underlying theme, and we have a brick and mortar here where we run subjects. There's a MRI as part of the medical building we're in on the first floor, and we have EEG, a bunch of experiential technologies here, and we run through subjects in IRB fashion and publish in peer-reviewed publications, much as the same an academic lab would.
We have a lot of people that are listening that come from the startup world that might not be familiar why the startup edge or angle to research is important. Like, I guess, why was that important for you guys as you were thinking about the formation of the Institute?
Yeah, it's important from a couple degrees in that, keeping a pulse on what exactly it is that people need and want, right? Like understanding in the startup world, understanding your customer, knowing your customer and meeting their demand and developing tools in accordance with that, as opposed to, completely siloing your project and being out of touch is one thing. And the second is really, again, kind of keeping eye on the prize of not getting too caught up in bureaucracy that's lost its context, right? So oftentimes at large institutions, it's a red tape labyrinth in there, and it's very hard sometimes to understand why these regulations are in place and who they were protecting and what type of vestiges they merely represent, right? Instead of having actual utility. Whereas in a smaller, more flexible boutique institute like ours, we can kind of assess things on a more one-off basis, and allows us to be much more rapid and capable in being able to form partnerships, accept monies from different organizations, etc. So it just makes us a bit more flexible and dynamic, which allows for us to keep a pulse on this rapidly evolving field.
Yeah, and one of the things I learned from Katie Devaney, who runs the meditation lab at Cal, is that a huge reason that we aren't further along in understanding meditation's impact on the brain is all of the things you mentioned. It's the where the funding comes from, lots of vested interests that have prevented us from making further strides. And so the ability to just kind of ground everything in practical application is amazing.
Agreed. Agreed. It's a story that many academics will know and appreciate. I mean, when I give talks and describe the institute before I present our work, I'm usually flooded with people coming up after and being like, whoa, wait, you're doing this outside of academia, and this is, all by the books, and you guys are publishing. It's like, it's scratching a long standing itch in the research community, in my opinion.
Amazing. And a little bit before the episode, we talked kind of about an overarching mission that you guys have that I think is very inspiring. I would love if you could share that with the audience.
Sure. Yeah. So the overarching theme, or the thread that kind of ties together all of our research, both the research that I had started the Institute with, and that, Leo has come in as this amazing champion in a new direction. What unites it all is our collective acknowledgement of the potency of experience and being able to transform individuals and provide them with insights that they can then translate into their lives, right? So the power of experience to change your life, to give it, a super lay title. The issue, though, right, that we acknowledge in all of our work is that as much as we would like to be searching for a panacea or some one-size-fits-all approach, not all our experiences are available to all people, right? So the theme then is democratizing non-ordinary states, right? How can we bring non-ordinary states to the average person, right? So we're taking a more technological approach, right? Where, and this is nothing new, right? If you tie it together through the right lens, we're taking a technological approach, but in a lot of ways, architecture and sacred spaces were the original technologies to help cultivate specific types of non-ordinary states, right? Like, you can think about all of the thinking and design that goes into a monastery, right, to help cultivate these deeper meditative states. So it's very much so in that vein where we're now trying to say, as our collaborator Matthew Saquette likes to say, bring things like meditation out of the monastery, right? Allow people to start riding a bike with training wheels, right? That the eventual goal is to take off. So with that preface, we've been focusing on meditation, developing technologies that can help people achieve deep meditative states such that they can almost see the view from the top of the mountain and then be inspired to cultivate their own discipline and motivation to climb back up there themselves, right? This is really all about not replacing practices, but assisting them. So we're doing that from both a personalized neurofeedback and taking into account neurodiversity and the fact that everybody's different. Again, this is democratizing these states, so really making not a one-size-fits-all approach, but the ability to have a personalized approach to get an assistance to deep meditative states. And then we're also trying to exogenously induce deep meditative states with low-intensity focused ultrasound, which is a way of specifically targeting deep brain regions. And then finally, trying to sidestep all of the cultural, societal, and pharmacological contraindications that come with psychedelic experiences is the project that Leo is spearheading, which is we're calling emulating entheogens to enhance empathy. And that's where we're leveraging technodelics in an a priori neuroscientific theory-driven approach to create mental states that are similar to what we observe on psychedelics or entheogens, but creating those states in a non-pharmacological route. And, Leo can speak to that, but that's the overarching theme of the democratizing non-ordinary states.
I love it. And, as someone who has been the massive beneficiary of psychedelics, who has a family that isn't quite as hot on taking something that is illegal, that is very important work from my perspective. I do want to zoom in on the meditation. I would call it the enhanced meditation broader category of experience.
Mhm.
As someone that has had a practice for over a decade, has seen the depths of experience that can come with regular practice, I think there's kind of almost like this like war, if you will, or different parties who have different beliefs about giving people access to these states, typically reserved for people that have reached a certain level of consciousness maturity, went through some type of spiritual initiation practice. It sounds like you guys are seeing this as a function to inspire versus replace by providing easier access. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I think one of the issues that we have just society in general is that we no longer have widespread institutionally sanctioned modes to achieve self-transcendent experiences, right? Most tribal societies, most of the early empires, going back to the Greeks, etc., there were rites that every person, whether they were a slave or a king, did early in life, and it was a way of teaching you what it was to be human. And these were these sort of difficult, often experiences. And the problem, I think, that it gives us a lot of our crisis of meaning and a lot of the alienation that exists in modern society is we don't have something like that. And so, while meditation and psychedelics offer a route to that, the problem is that psychedelics have a lot of counterindications. They're not for everybody, particularly if you have certain predispositions. And some of these meditative techniques, to achieve proficiency in them can take years of discipline and practice. So it's not that we're saying we're going to give someone exact equivalence, but can you give someone a safe experience that shows them something beyond daily consciousness, that allows them to go, I saw it, I experienced something there, that allows me to orient towards it with a more steady practice and achieve a more sort of expanded form of it with more agency. But just a way to just show that some of these states are there. Because oddly enough, a lot of our work suggests that one of the roots is actually through aesthetic experience. It's just that that's not, because of the way art is delivered oftentimes nowadays, we're not taught to think of it in that through that same spiritual lens. But that's often, that I think is one of the factors that explains the modern explosion of, of large scale dance festivals and rave music. A lot of people have spoken about this. It's something that provides a collective, fusion experience with the transcendent. And we're just trying to offer something, that's grounded in the most boring, cut and dry science, right? Unimpeachable, that no one can tinge with any of the sort of old countercultural lenses or anything, such that people who would otherwise be put off by it can have a way to step into those experiences as well and see what the rest of us are talking about.
That's amazing. Well, as someone who has kind of reoriented my life after a peak experience like that, I certainly can appreciate the value of making those transcendent experiences more accessible. A question that I have is I'm pretty ignorant towards, I've heard a lot about ultrasound and its ability to provide access to these altered states. I know there's a company called Journey out there. I know you met, I think I heard a talk about Jason Guetti. I know he's kind of working on something. What is the current state of ultrasound and meditation right now, or ultrasound and altered states? It would be helpful to just understand kind of what we know and what we don't know.
Yeah, so surprisingly, most of what we know has been of this very specific niche field, right, of ultrasound being applied to regions of interest that would help to encourage meditative states, is mostly anecdotal, right? So Jay Sanguinetti and Shinzen Young kind of spearheaded a lot of this effort, and some of that was, a more clandestine approach. Some of it is inside Jay's laboratory, but the idea is that, induce when targeting, Jay's main focus area was the posterior cingulate cortex, is that upon stimulating these regions, which, there's a whole host of debate, and we've done a review on this of whether or not this is actually excitatory or inhibitory, and whether it's targeting, pyramidal neurons or inner neurons, and like there's a whole bunch of complexity. But let's just say, to keep it simple, modulating that region, that people are able to engage in a down regulation of self-referential thinking, right? So being able to cultivate a state that's more akin to, ideal meditative states, or things like samatha and vipassana, right? Where you're seeing things clearly without the lens of your own embodied percept, right? Non-judgmental awareness, etc. So it helps to, especially for those who have already had the experience, or are already familiar with entering into these types of open awareness states, that they can essentially make that process easier, right? So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence pointing to that. And now we've designed here at IACS what will be, the first large scale study to actually investigate this in a sham controlled neuronavigated neuronavigated protocol that essentially evaluates 3 different regions. So we're doing the posterior cingulate cortex, we're doing the bilateral caudate, and then the bilateral ventral anterior insula. And so right now, that's the latest and greatest, and this is what's happening right here. And we've run about 17 subjects now, and the statistics are extremely strong and promising. So yeah, I mean, the latest is coming right now from this institute. I'd be happy to, kind of dive into any details on that. But yeah, it's been kind of anecdotal for a while, and now it's coming into the mainstream. Like we have our, pre-registration under review at different, at some journals, and yeah, so it's forthcoming, but very exciting. And I have all of the data right now at my fingertips because I just gave a couple presentations. So happy to answer any questions pertaining to that topic.
And having been a blinded subject myself, the some of the effects are pretty startling.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Just to paint a picture, my first question is, when you say the data or evidence is strong, what does that mean to you?
That means that, for the first time in this neuromodulation field, we're able to see, accounting for sham, strongly significant, like high effect sizes, differences in subjective experience, right? Specifically on the axis of meditative depth, and sustaining that for periods following stimulation. So our study, probes for depth in these expert meditators for a long period of time following, before, during, and after stimulation. And we see this marked increase in depth in specific regions. Specifically, the caudate has been our leading region, whereby people are both afterwards reporting these profound, non-ordinary experiential states, but then online they're actually reporting, something between 40 and 50% deeper depth than just sham, right? Which would have been as a function of time, right? So people are going to get deeper and deeper as a function of time. There's ebbs and flows to the experience, but it usually increases in depth as a function of time. And here we're seeing, like, even controlling for time and controlling for sham, which would be controlling for like a placebo. It's a really intense setup, right? Like you think you're getting stimulation, but you're not. But when you actually get the stimulation, right, you're seeing 40% increases in depth. And then afterwards, you're seeing more ego dissolution, more feelings of surrender, love, compassion. So things like that, right, are really striking when you think about the fact that we're just exogenously modulating discrete brain areas.
I have so many questions. My first one is you mentioned kind of the deepening of experience afterwards, a prolonged effect. Is that in the day after, in the weeks and months after? I'm curious to understand whether this is kind of like permanently opening up some depth afterwards, or we're referring to something that is more, closely coupled with the actual stimulation.
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, we're not equipped to answer that. We're equipped to answer the acute state effects that may or may not be transient at this point, right? Because given how novel this research is, we kind of just focused on, okay, what are we inducing now? So we can, they're meditating for 45 minutes following stimulation. So we can speak to that time period, and then about the hour after, where they're answering questionnaires and providing responses to interviews. But in the future, right, the idea would be to expand this study into something more longitudinal, right, and even try and repeat the same experience over and over again to see, like, how does that compare to, you know, the standard 8-week MBSR program, right, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and seeing to what degree it confers similar benefits that are more long-lasting and ecologically valid. But this kind of first foray into this space was, can we move the needle on acute reports of subjective experience? So hopefully we'll know, you know, within a couple of years, the answer to your question.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. You know, I might ask you guys to kind of put down the scientific rigor hat for a second here, because, you know, there are many people out there who believe that consciousness exists independent of the brain. You know, look, there's lots of things like near-death experiences that point to anecdotes where, you know, the person is pronounced dead, yet there's an awareness that exists. And so, you know, this kind of, I would be curious, like, and I know where you guys are focused is the scientific explanatory stuff. But what is your own view of that, given kind of what you're seeing and learning, and also some of the other anecdotes out there that think that these things kind of exist independently?
Yeah. So I personally lean a bit more towards, you know, a Radiohead interpretation, right? Where consciousness is not necessarily an emergent phenomenon that happens when you connect neurons in a sufficiently complex enough way that it's something that emerges, right? Which then begets the whole mind body problem, supposed hard problem of consciousness. And I think you can skirt around a lot of that by thinking about the fact that a brain, you know, made of neurons or any other substance capable of having its own cause effect power, is just basically like building an antenna, right, or a radio to be able to pick up on, you know, fundamental, like, I think consciousness is primary, right, and is a fundamental state of the universe, and that certain, you know, configurations of matter can receive that and provide a unique experience on that, right? A one, you know, I can only see out of these eyes, and, you know, in line with my sensory organs. So I'm a little bit more in that realm of thinking. I think it simplifies things and also, you know, pays respect to a more potential source consciousness from which we all stem. But I don't know Leo's views too well.
Leo, what do you think?
I mean, my views might very much align, but just be sort of described or experienced differently. I think that I've had certain experiences, and I know others have had them as well. And, you know, my somewhat amateurish understanding of certain aspects of physics at least leads me to playfully believe that part of why non-locality, right, the possible like non-local or distributed nature of consciousness is counterintuitive, is just because our mode of perception is sort of optimized for, you know, because it has to persist over time and feed and things along those lines, is optimized for this kind of very local, spatially discrete form of perceiving things, and that it's entirely possible that there are modes of information sharing that simply, you know, you could say, it exists in, let's say, higher dimensional forms, such that what appears to us as very distant, for example, in space and time, may not be so when viewed in other ways. It's such that things that appear very far from each other in space and time may, from other perspectives, may not be so, such that, you know, maybe we're all just different aspects of one vibrating thing. Entirely possible. I would be presumptuous to assume otherwise. And that maybe there are some people who have suggested, you know, from the physical sphere, that might be one way to interpret what currently appears sort of paradoxes of non-locality within generally locally interpretable phenomena, right? And we have to, the thing I always try to remember as a scientist, that if you're being honest with yourself as a scientist, you have to remember that ultimately what we are and who we descend from the tribal era, we're the storytellers. It's all we are. We are storytellers trying to tell better and better and more interesting stories. So I think, we shouldn't get too caught up in the stories themselves. Just remember that we're always trying to tell new ones. So I, admit my ignorance in that, but also admit that I've had very, very strange experiences that defy a lot of my intuitions and learning, in that domain.
It's part of the mystery, as they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Part of the mystery and part of the fun as consciousness explorers.
Very much so.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about technodelics.
Mm.
This is probably a term that many people have not heard of before. And so maybe as a starting place, we could describe what that is.
Yeah, I can give a quick overview of it. The idea, at least from our perspective, right, is using non-pharmacological, meaning not needing to ingest any chemicals, in order to induce the experience, and being able to induce self-transcendent experiences specifically, by way of technological means, right? And there's a number of different ways to do that, which Leo will talk to, but the general idea is, okay, if we're starting to know a little bit about what the brain looks like under psychedelics or entheogens or other types of mystical experiences, are there ways in which we can kind of reverse engineer that same brain state neurally, right? With technological means, right? With the idea of saying, okay, well, if we can make a brain state that has high representational similarity to that which seen, then can we infer that the underlying subjective experience would also be similar, and that the benefits that are conferred to individuals would have that same experience, right? So this is, in line with things like the entropic brain hypothesis, and things like trying to put the brain into a state of near criticality so that it can make, propagate large scale adjustments. The idea is, like, can we get there with a non-pharmacological route? And there's a lot of nuance and detail that really helps bring it alive, but that's the general concept.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary axiom we depart from is that experience is crucial, experience is central. Some approaches, not to overly simplify them, but some approaches occurring now to bring the benefits of psychedelic therapy to the masses, basically, have taken a bit of an approach that it's, can we evoke all the pharmacological mechanisms without the troublesome experience, but the difficult part? And we may not be right, but we take the opposite tack. We think the experience is the key. And such, our goal is to think, well, what are the key aspects of psychedelic, or actually not just psychedelic? We believe that these states are achievable through religious and mystical experience, through meditative experience, aesthetic. But what are the key features of entheogenic experience, self-transcendent experience, and can we basically do a forward test of our theories by trying to recreate those features and see if it recreates the neural and behavioral outcomes that we know to be associated with these states, right? So in doing so, we depart from a basic concept from sort of cognitive science and its intersection with information theory, the notion that the basic prior, that individuation and your belief structures and everything depart from, is figuring out the boundary between what is you and what is not you. So the first thing you have to do when you are born and before you're born is your brain as a statistical organ starts to figure out what is me and what is not me. And one of the ways it does that is by simply observing correlations between, well, when I do this, something else moves as well. That must mean it's part of me, right? And we start doing little things like that, and we tune that barrier. But the point is that that's ultimately a statistical, not convenience, but let's just call it that for now. And so the notion is that when we have self-transcendent experiences, part of what's going on during that is literally a temporary dissolution or relaxation of that self-other boundary. Now, and if we frame it that way, as a perceptual motor mechanism, well, that means there's like an entry point for us to actually use technology to violate or to modulate that assumption. So two of the ways that we're doing that in our current approaches are, one, to create a binding between the experience that you're having, in this case, a guided meditation, for example, and what's going on in your body. So we actually use a prosthesis called the Frisson device, invented by, in part, by our collaborator Felix Scholler, which allows you to augment and deliver the sensation of aesthetic chills in coordination with sort of music and narrative coming with the meditation, right? Which is, if you've experienced psychedelics, et cetera, you know that when you're experiencing a beautiful narrative within it or music, your whole body becomes involved in it, right? There ceases to be a distinction between what is held in your mind and what is experienced by your body, right? So mind-body coordination. The other aspect is dissolving a bit of the boundary between self and environment, right? So if you've ever been in certain types of non-ordinary states, the clouds breathe with you, right? You see yourself reflected in everything else, and that seems to be part of its transformative aspect. It allows you to reinforces the connection between you and others. So one of the ways we do that is by using an immersive environment provided by our collaborators over at Lumina, the Infinity Cube, which we're currently developing technologies that will allow us to essentially have the environment be responsive to your internal state. So as you breathe, as your heart beats, and those properties of those change, the environment changes with it. And by essentially enforcing statistical dependencies between self and environment, you start to break down the sense of what is you and what is not you. And we believe that by combining these features, and we already have some preliminary evidence suggesting that the effect is very much along the lines of our expectations, that we can essentially engineer self-transcendent experiences, which interestingly seem to, when you break down that barrier between self and other, you often tend to find that people become more pro-social as a result. There's something about feeling like you're part of everything that makes you suddenly want to be more loving and kind. Isn't that interesting? Right.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And look, this, as you guys pointed out, this is not a new thing, right? Like, you can look back at the Egyptians or many of these ancient cultures that, had certain places to go to do this, and they had their own version of technologies that have, been forgotten or suppressed or whatever it is, that are doing exactly what you're talking about. And so I think it's incredibly exciting that you guys are doing this. And my question would be, it sounds like there's a kind of a smorgasbord of different sound, light, vibration combinations that are creating these experiences. Is the goal to find the most efficacious methodologies and combinations? What are you guys really kind of trying to learn here?
Yeah, so while we envision that the final experience is going to be, sufficiently complex and will require multimodal, multisensory upregulations of sensory activity, we're taking an iterative approach right now. In the sense of, while it very well may be the case that there's an emergent phenomenon where the sum is greater than its parts, we still want to understand the contributory components of each part. So right now, we've been taking a research trajectory aimed on identifying the pillars of this experience. And Leo's touched on a couple of them, right? Being this dissolving of boundary, dissolving the partition between self and environment, the phenomenon of aesthetic chills, right? Which we think is going to be a fantastic interface because, don't get me started. I'll go on a whole tangent about how I think that aesthetic chills are the most slept on phenomenon in neuroscience. It's underutilized. It's this beautiful interface between cognition and somatic and interoceptive processes, right? Which is, kind of a beautiful bridge between all of this, work in the ways in which the mind can affect the body, like placebo, right? Or the ways in which people are trying to intervene on beliefs, right? Like through somatic therapy, et cetera. And really trying to acknowledge, using chills as this interface to acknowledge the connection between mind and body and moving cognitive science, as Leo says, below the neck. But so yeah, we're focusing on those pillars of the experience, whereas the eventual, right, we think in order to achieve this state, it will by necessity require the upregulation of multiple sensory modalities at once, right? To kind of mimic some of this serotonergic action on association areas, right, in the brain, whereby, you know, if you're being presented with semantic content, right, like a hypnotherapist is speaking about an empathogenic meditation, right? You're focusing on loving kindness to yourself and then to close others and further others, etc. To specifically complement that, what's being housed as purely semantic information with kind of like you would expect in a score to a movie, right? There's a swelling of orchestral movements that are complementing the emotional tension in the film. There's changes of the camera perspective and changes of the color tones, etc., that are matching and accentuating things. So we think that all of that is important, but we want to specifically take an iterative approach to understand the specifics of why it's important for the axes we're concerned with, right? Which is promoting self-transcendence and promoting engagement to then encourage pro-social behavior and social moral elevation, essentially. So we're seeing what's important and what's not, but I personally think it's going to all be important. But we're doing science.
Yeah, and something else to just add to that is that, you know, ultimately the goal is something that can be an on-site, you know, multimodal, all the bells and whistles intervention, but that by showing people that full experience and showing them, you know, the place for them to come back to, as is the experience of many people who have achieved these states, it's easier to get back there once you've been there, right? And the idea is that with, for example, tools that Nicco and others that are currently developing, we can actually use biofeedback and home VR to reinstantiate these tailored neural states once people have reached them. So we help you get there, right? Show you what it's like, and then help you get back there on your own in the comfort of your home. That's the eventual goal, basically. Because obviously, not everyone can have one of these in their home. Not every, you know, these aren't going to be accessible on a daily basis to everyone out there. But we do want to democratize these experiences.
I really like the approach of kind of starting with the core essence of why the experience is transcendent versus starting with, we're going to do sound or we're going to do light, or you know what I mean? I think that's really, really smart. I actually just bought an Opus sound bed. It just got to my house.
Oh my.
It's pretty badass. Like it's pretty great. But, you know, I know the people that started it. In fact, hopefully they're going to be on the podcast. And it was starting from a different vector, right? Which is, we know that sound can impact the nervous system and can entrain the brain and vibration and can do these things. So let's do something cool with sound versus something like you're describing, which is, hey, we know that when someone removes the boundaries of being a separate entity, they have an amazing experience. Here's all the ways that you can actually do that, which makes a lot of sense to me. That's really cool.
Well, it's funny you mentioned sound, because actually one of the components that we didn't speak about, that's one of the sort of like, let's say, secondary bells and or whistles, is also we want to actually complement this additionally with a sort of haptic and sonic sort of, not just intervention in the ears, but actually like using sound and haptic vibrations and stimulation to actually complement this experience also by actual, you know, vibration and sensations in the body that allow you to evoke a variety of things, such as, you know, simulating effective touch, but also drawing attention to parts of the body in a way that aids the meditative experience. It's a whole thing.
I'm really interested to learn more, because I've gotten downloads in my meditations about doing something in haptics. So,
there you go.
And I don't even know what that word means. I didn't know what that word means until it came into my awareness. So, you know, we should talk. But the other thing I know a lot of people would just find quite interesting is I think you guys went to a Joe Dispenza retreat.
That's correct.
And I have not been. I read one of his books many years ago. I took one of his online courses, and I have had friends that have went to the events and said that they had a profound experience. Would be interested to learn what that was like and what you guys learned.
Yes. So we were fortunate enough to be contracted by UCSD, where Inner Science is doing most of their research. Inner Science is Joe Dispenza's kind of like scientific research arm organization. They've been working with Dr. Hemal Patel there, and Leo's been doing a lot of the EEG analysis of the data that's been collected at these retreats, and they encouraged us to go out to Nashville to have the experience for ourselves so that we could better kind of understand what we're studying. And I'll let Leo speak to it more, but it was a very grateful for the experience, because what I truly saw was the validity of personal experience, right? Like I'm of the belief that if you're having an experience, that experience is valid, right? Of course. You're not, deluded or having, some hallucination. You're having an experience, and that experience is valid, especially if it's transformative for you. And I've had plenty as well. And, in doing his experience, in participating in the experience, I think one of the most potent parts is the fact that you're doing it with thousands of other people at the same time, which is really powerful. And I think where there's a divorce that can be mended between mainstream science and these, potent experiences is an explanation as to the mechanism supporting this, right? And I think that's where a lot of people tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Yeah.
Is that oftentimes some teachers or proponents of it will start speaking with conviction about the mechanisms that are supporting these experiences with with little to no scientific evidence about this, right? And a lot of times it's due to a lack of sensitivity to have the right tools to do this, or there's some misinformation that's just modern lore. And so that's like, I think, the interface that we're kind of coming into it as. And Leo's been designing tools and analyses to be able to identify what are some of these mechanisms, right, that are supporting these valid experiences, and how can we speak to them meaningfully and make it tractable, really.
Right. Yeah, we went. It was a week-long experience. We experienced many different varieties of the meditations there, and I think I think what Nicco says is spot on. I think that if one takes a charitable view, and I don't mean charitable in the sense of giving charity, but in the sense that you assume that the person that whatever you're examining has some validity, and there's some reason why people are interested, and there's some reason why it has its effects. You can look at many retreats such as these and see a lot of very cutting edge ideas, as well as at the same time traditional ideas being enacted, even if often the explanation around them is more about making people feel sort of safe and introduced and making it intuitive. But you can see some very interesting ideas around mind-body coherence and about using creative visualization and thinking about ways to situate very difficult or strange experiences in a framework that actually makes sense and ties it back to ideas about physics and the like. So I think there's a lot of merit there, and I think what's really exciting is the prospect of, as the science of contemplative practice and entheogenics proceeds, that retreats like these and groups like that of Dr. Dispenza's will be useful in actually trying to work out these mechanisms and not be so afraid of non-ordinary experiences, right? Where I think we're coming out of a long period very dominated by behaviorism, and it kind of dismisses or is skeptical of the actual contents of experience. I think we're starting to emerge from that. And one of the bridges between the richness of experience and things like neural data that I've found very useful has actually come from a personal obsession of mine, which is sort of chaos theory and complex systems theory. And there are all these cool informational sort of processing analytical tools that use things like entropy, for example, like the level of informational content within a given signal or in a different connectivity pattern. And there's a growing field of study that allows you to actually relate the literal, quantifiable informational content of signals deriving from a system and relate that to the actual informational richness felt by the system itself. So you can find a lot of studies that relate level of complexity in brain signals to the actual richness of the conscious experience. And we've been trying to develop different tools of that kind to actually look at the different types of meditation undergone during experiences like that of Dr. Dispenza's, and finding, very interesting early results.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I think the takeaway for me is, just the power of doing something in community, which
Yes.
is
Yes.
something that humans have done for a long time,
Yeah.
right? And, maybe if we didn't have the largest religion in the world saying unordinary states were witchcraft and you should get burned at
Yes.
the stake, we would, be doing more of that these days than we currently are. But we are where we are, and it's exciting to reintroduce these ideas to what feels like an increasingly receptive population.
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, I know some of your work has touched upon the idea of potentially joint consciousness or connecting with other people's consciousness. Would love to learn more about that.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't been doing a terrible amount of direct work in that capacity, but we've definitely been developing some thinking and putting together some grants about, just a more, meeting the field where it is on those terms, right? Of the ways in which at least beliefs can be shared amongst
Mm-hmm.
people, and whether or not that's, like a non-local communication or non-verbal, and the degrees to which you can, transmit information non-locally, especially teachings, but be it just from like perceived feelings of others, or empathy, right? I think that empathy is actually like this very grounded way to almost, without necessarily having a verbal component, to infer and internalize others' states. Yeah. And, I think Leo, is obviously a master in this domain, but we've been thinking about different ways in which, like Leo was saying about taking, information theory and seeing the degree to which there are distributed processes within people,
Mm-hmm.
and, not going so far as to, talk about telepathy or remote viewing and things, like trying to ground it in a toehold in mainstream academic science before branching out too far. But some of the things that Leo's been employing, like things like mutual information, where we can understand the coherence that two distinct states can enter and resonate with each other. And I love hearing Leo talk about like the transfer of priors, etc. So I'll let him take that part. But yeah, interesting
Yeah.
stuff.
So basically, something I've been interested for a long time through the study of empathy, and a lot of my mentor Michael Iacoboni when I was at UCLA was one of the early pioneers of mirror neuron research. And something that I always found interesting about that was that the phenomenon of empathy and many other related phenomena very much suggests to me that consciousness itself is kind of a distributed phenomenon. Because if you think about it, so much of your model of the world and even your model of yourself and how you feel about the world and what you think is happening in it is derived not just from the beliefs that are transmitted to you from other people, but even from sharing and their reactions towards it, right? If someone you trust or someone you look, is an authority, hears a sound or takes a piece of food or listens to something and responds to it in fear, you're going to immediately infer a threatening cause to what they're responding to, right? We're deriving our world model and even our model of selves from the cues that we take from others. And a lot of the work we've been doing is looking at how trust is a mediating mechanism of that. Basically, that we create these joint models of the world among networks of people, and the key factor mediating who you let into your world and who you coordinate with to make a world is trust, which suggest one of the it's a very exciting field of work, but one of the troubling suggestions there is that a lot of the media siloing mechanisms that we've seen already creating social fracturing all over the world incur in part because if people are essentially living in different informational worlds and they're induced to not trust other people from other groups, you can create a level of literal like fracturing of entire worlds where people not only don't feel that they share a worldview with someone, but that it also impedes the sharing of all sorts of other forms of information, making them, for example, less sensitive to the pain of others in another group. So basically, that we have to be very careful about what we're doing now with the siloing of information among people, because it can create a siloing of consciousness and a siloing of empathy even between people. So we're becoming very attendant to these group level phenomena in consciousness.
It's such an important focus, in my opinion. I mean, it just feels like the world has never been more polarized. And I think it's, a lot of it is for the exact reasons you described. And
I wouldn't say it's never been more polarized, but it's never been able to be polarized so quickly. It used to take hundreds of years. It used to take hundreds of years for a bunch of people who agreed with each other to convince other and form a giant 1,000-person cult. Now it takes a week.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to deal with that yet. We're nowhere. We haven't caught up to the pace of our technological, capacity for self-destruction.
Yeah, and I think maybe a better way of putting it is like it never feels so so in my potentially in my face, right? Where if I was, let's say you're France and England and you hate each other, well, I'm probably not really dealing with French people very often in the 1200s, right? But now all I need to do is to pull out my phone and very, very easily and accessibly, I can see someone vehemently sharing their view that I would think is unproductive or is refuting mine or whatever it is. And so, yeah, the velocity of polarization, the visibility of it, the accessibility of it, maybe that's more the phenomenon.
Right. Well, and that device you're pulling out is going to be optimized to show you what's going to cause the strongest reaction in you. It's going to show you the things that's going to piss you off the most right away. Of all the thousands of salient events you could see, it's going to show you those ones, and it's made for that. So the way it distorts our worldview and our sort of still, thousands of years old primate brain, like the implications, we still haven't quite figured them out. So this is, again, why we need self-transcendence. We need these antidotes.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. And, it's exciting for, I think with a lot of these experiences, the ability to rediscover the inner technologies, right? To get our information, to help us navigate our experience. And, they are emergent with consciousness is my experience. So, getting people kind of on that path where they're not as obsessively on their phone because they're able to create, bliss, joy, intuition, whatever it is, I think is a very productive thing for society.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you guys are doing some awesome stuff. I mean, I know our mutual friend Greg said he's actually participating in some studies, and maybe I need to go out to LA and do the same myself. But I think for people that are kind of curious about following your work, maybe getting involved, just learning more, would be great if you guys could give an overview of what's available and how to do those things.
Sure. Yeah, on our website, advancedconsciousness.org. You can find everything from signing up for our email list, finding our socials, and then under the research tab, every project is listed, and anyone that's currently recruiting, you can sign up there on the website and fill out the information, get screened, informed consent, and if you qualify, come on in.
That's right.
Yeah, there's a whole host of different experiential technologies we have here. Some studies are already finished, some are underway, some are soon starting. So yeah, it's open enrollment. So
awesome.
Yeah, just a last shameless plug. We're also experimenting with the crowdfunding of research. So on the page you can also see a number of projects that anyone can be a contributor, anyone can be a donor, anyone can be part of making things like neuromodulation of the pineal gland a reality. So
yeah, that kind of speaks to Scott's original point, is like, what type of stuff can you do that's different of like the startup world. It's like, well, we're not necessarily beholden to any one particular funder or institution's philosophy, right? We can do seemingly out there stuff, right? Like we're trying to run an ultrasound study to non-invasively neuromodulate the pineal gland, right? Because we think that's an important data point to have. Nobody has that data point. Everybody speaks with such conviction as the pineal gland is the first instrument of the soul or the seat of consciousness. And other people say that it does nothing more than secrete melatonin. Is the answer somewhere in between? I don't know. Nobody knows because they're scared of studying it. So in a place like this, we can do that and not have to apply for funding either, right? We've made it now open. We just made it open to crowdsourced funding. So if anybody's interested in seeing that come to life, that's another thing you can check out on our website, and help us bring it alive.
Zap around and find out.
I love
Exactly.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think you just got, a donor here.
Fantastic.
I might support your guys effing around. Cool. Well, we'll link all that stuff in the show notes. Thanks again, guys. Really amazing to have this
Thank
conversation.
you, Scott.
Thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We really
Take it easy, guys.
appreciate you.